Hey everybody, this is Perch. I've talked before about the old fans versus new fans and kind of the different segmentation of comic fans. If you've ever been a retailer or a successful seller, you know about audience segmentation. It's not meant to kind of make yourself sound smart, or it's not meant to be an intellectual exercise. It's actually meant to, help you know how to sell. And I find this is an area that, as time goes by, it's increasingly a lost art with a lot of companies. The ability to kind of size up your audience, understand it, think about what matters to what people. It's it I, it's often described this way: if you have a store and you have your clientele, your customer base are millennials. Um, and you stock your store with a bunch of hearing aids and multifocal glasses and readers and things like that, walking canes. Well, you're probably not going to sell, those items in your store because your audience is young and they don't need those products. And audience segmentation is nothing more simple or more complicated than know your audience, know who's going to buy what, and go forward. I think comic books are in an interesting crossroads, and I'm kind of hating everything I'm about to say, but I think it is true, and at this point, maybe undeniable. Um, we are living in a world where a lot of comic books, I would say 60% of the comics, are purchased by an older audience. Gen X, I think, is really propping up a lot of comics. The older millennials are probably in there too. And a lot of this audience are collectors. They're people who have a lot of comics at home. They're completing their runs. There's some speculators in there, but that's our bulk of our comic buying audience. And so that group is enough to kind of sustain us at 50,000, 60,000 copies for a lot of books, but it is slowly getting smaller. And when I say it's slowly getting smaller, I don't mean, unlike what Marvel editors will tell you, people are just dying off in the streets. It's not like that. It is, they're losing interest. They're finally getting to a point where it's like, you know what, I've collected X-Men for my entire life, and the title is unrecognizable at this point. They've given me 50 jumping off points, and I'm gonna finally jump off. I'm gonna do what they want me to do, and I'm jumping off. I think that increasingly that older audience, that 60, maybe 70%, kind of in that range, they're starting to do that in increasing numbers, and that's why your comic sales are slowly sinking. And then I think your new audience, in theory, your people who are coming in and falling in love with these characters for the first time, that tends to be your a little bit of Gen Alpha, mostly Gen Y, younger millennials. But the comics are being made and edited and curated, and kind of the pitches are largely done by that age group, by that generation. And that generation is looking at it going, I don't want to be encumbered by history. In some cases, I don't want to pay for the comic. I was again reminded just the other day of a prominent Marvel editor who was recommending to their friends to get caught up on her comics, and she was recommending they go to Read Free Comics Online and pirate them. And this is somebody who works for a company whose profit and loss, or P&L, is directly related to if comics are bought or not. But this audience, believes that payment is kind of optional. It believes that history is fluid. And recently, I've done a couple of videos. This showed up when I did I answered the question of, is Catwoman black? Or when I've done videos in the past talking about, hey, no matter what, no matter how he's written today, back in the '60s, Iceman was certainly not gay. And I use this sentence, this expression, history matters, to comics. History actually matters. To me, I think it's baked into what comics are. Comics are a serialized, subscription-based product. I understand they're not sold in subscriptions in a lot of cases, but that is what they are. They're a B2B2C. Publisher creates a product for a reseller who sells them to customers. And the strength of the line is in kind of cranking along with existing IP. But even if it's a brand new character, if it's if it's something new like Invincible, well, look at the comic Invincible. Invincible works and is written and is sold based on history. The reveals in Invincible only work when you care about that history and you take that history into account. If you don't do that, the reveals and things they don't function. They don't work. The idea that Nolan is actually trying to take things over, but he has a change of heart, and it's part of his marriage to his wife that leads him to do this, and the long drawn out sequence with Amber and then Adam Eve and all that kind of stuff. It works because there's history. And if you say that history doesn't matter, it allows you to do things like during the run of Invincible, you get up to issue like 90, and it's like, you know what? Fuck it. Mark Grayson is now trans. Why not? He also never, he's got a dog now and he loves dogs and he never had a dad. And also he's, Mexican for some reason. Like, if you believe that you can just change traits around because history doesn't matter, you have a very different product. And I mean, I'm not saying that from a race or a gender perspective, because too many people bitch about that. You can even do things as simple as you take the Fantastic Four and you're like, well, you know what? Them going to space and cosmic rays, that's kind of cheesy. Peter Parker getting bit by a radioactive spider, that's cheesy and old fashioned. Now what happened is actually Peter Parker, had a ancient curse placed on his grandparents, and he was born with spider powers, and it's a blessing and a curse because of family history, and that's how he got his powers. Like, you can invent any shit you want in all this, if you start to completely disregard history. But I think comic books, the product, they have to have history. I mentioned that generation stuff at the beginning because if you blow up history, then you're pushing down on the gas pedal of alienating that 60 to 70% that are buying your comics, that older audience that is buying them out of habit. If you suddenly tell them, hey, all that stuff you were collecting, all that history, all the the background into what this book is, hey, it doesn't, we've changed it. It doesn't matter anymore. None of that stuff is true anymore. If that's where you go, I mean, it's basically telling people it doesn't matter. If you go to a football fan and, 1 week, it's time for football, and the Dallas Cowboys come out, piece of shit team, but anyway, the Dallas Cowboys came out, and suddenly, the team is people you don't know. The fans are gonna be like, "What the hell? I've got my jersey that I paid a bunch of money for, and I know these players, and like, why have all the players suddenly changed?" And you say, "Well, it's still football. Like, why do you care? Why should you care? Shouldn't these other players that you've never heard of get a chance to play? Why do you care? You care because you come back every week with some sense of continuity. The team that you cheer for plays, and at the end of the year, some of those people leave, some come, and there's a big drama around trades and everything else. But that's how the sport operates. It's built on repeat viewing. Almost all entertainment products are built on people coming back for more. If you take away the reason for people to come back for more, you blow up your product. And comic books, whether you like the history or dislike the history, and by the way, several of you have written in like, I'm so sick of you always talking about history. I mean, you're welcome to believe that, but it 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 doesn't it's still important. Um, I think that this new audience, the kind of this smaller demographic who's coming to comics, many of whom again are not buying the comic, feels no obligation to buy the comic. I think that's another clue. If you've been attached to a comic, to something for many years, you feel obligated to spend money. It's part of the experience. You believe it's important for you to actually buy something. If you take that, if you take that away, that history away, why should you buy something? How many of you right now, and I mean, I ask this as a challenging question, you've read a comic for the first time or an indie comic or whatever. Um, How many of you have said, well, I'm going to pirate this first. I'm going to try this online for free first. And if I like it, I'll go buy it. Let's assume for a moment you do actually do that. That's not just a line. You don't just tell yourself that to help you sleep at night or whatever. You actually do buy the things you like. Well, if everything in comics, if you remove the continuity, if you remove the history, if you remove all of that, then basically every comic, every book, everything that gets sold is a decide if you like it in the moment. And if that's where your mentality is, you're not going to pay for anything. I think history really matters in comics. All of it. The good, the bad, the ugly. Carol Danvers making out with her son was ugly. But if you remove that stuff, if you retcon out everything, if you constantly are disregarding your history, and if you basically cultivate a fan base that is annoyed by the history, hates the history, doesn't want the history, and you hire those people into your company, I think you are committing suicide to your business, to your product, and to everything that you have. The world isn't meant to completely detach from history. At least the comic book world is not. It's built on it. It is so much the foundation of what comics are. And again, I hear from fans from time to time. Not fans of me, but fans of comics. People will say things like, "Well, a lot of the old comics were racist," or, they were really built for white people, and now comics are finally able to build for a diverse audience. That cool. That's great. I'm glad we have a diverse audience that are interested in buying comics. That's good news. But your history is still your history, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's mostly white, whatever it happens to be. It's still your history. None of that history is preventing you from making new characters, putting the spotlight on other characters. It can be done. We know it can be done. There are women superheroes that have been successful. There are Black superheroes. You have a wide variety of characters who have managed to be successful when you write a good story and when you have confidence in them. That's how you play to your new diverse audience. And by the way, I do for the record, and I reject the premise that a diverse audience only wants to read, comics that show their race. I don't think that's accurate. I think there's plenty of evidence to suggest that's absolutely not true. I don't believe that Black children never had any comics to read before Miles Morales came around. I think that people like good stories and superheroes, and I think kids in particular, the new audience, the young audience we want, are a hell of a lot more colorblind than their adults think they are. Adults get in the way, say, well, my son has to see themselves in the comic, or my daughter has to see themselves in the comic. I'll tell you, as somebody who's sold comics for 30 years, that's not what I see. And that's not how the audience comes in. The audience comes in looking for entertainment. And when you give it to them, they're happy. And it's really that simple. I promise you, I've had parents do this, but I've never had kids. I've never had brand new comic readers come in and go, I'd really like to start reading comics, but I'm gonna need an Asian or an Indian comic, because as you can see, I am Indian, and so the superhero has to be Indian, or I won't be able to read it. I can't do it. No, that I can tell you point blank that has never happened. So anyway, this video is about history. History is important, but more importantly than that importance, I sound like Kamala Harris all of a sudden. The understanding of being is the enlightenment of tomorrow. Whatever. The most important thing is history is baked into the business, and it's baked into the product itself. If you remove it, I think you put a dagger in the heart of comics itself. They're not meant to be disconnected, and they really can't be. Thanks for listening.